And welcome to Manure Mondays on Monday, February the whatever it is today, February 6th. And welcome to February as well. So we had a great week last week. We had an excellent turnout, good turnout from all over the US, a number from across Canada and all over Ontario. And what a great start. We talked about the impact of management on greenhouse gas emissions. And if you attended that, you heard James Dick. It was a fabulous presentation. Really encourage you to check back, have a look at that recording. One of the things I really enjoyed was the way James put in perspective the different greenhouse gases and what it looks like. You know, you could look at a pile of solid manure and say, I know what a ton of solid manure looks like. But can you look at a pile of CO2 and say that's what a ton of CO2 looks like? So neat thing to check back on. He really gave a great intro. So we're back this week. Today a little different. We're actually going to do a virtual farm tour, and this piggybacks on a actual farm tour that happened this past week. It was in the Moorfield area in Ontario, in the Drayton area. They went to a farm, went to see Pit King, and from what I heard, had a fabulous 2-hour discussion about aspects of manure management. So great start. That was in person. Today we're virtual, continuing the farm tour. And so there'll be lots of opportunity for questions in the chat. And also, if you want to raise your hand, if you really feel like your question needs to be one that's said directly, then raise your hand and our moderator today will recognize you when the time is right. We are offering 1 CEU credit for this session, and what we would ask, same as last week, is just put your name and your CCA code in the chat through a direct message to Christine Brown, and she will be sure to register that for you. Okay, please stay muted throughout, but again, we do want lots of questions in the chat. And to start the chat going today, you know, I was just thinking about the fact that when I grew up, manure was just something you got rid of. There was a pile of manure, you had to get rid of it. It was in a pen somewhere, you had to fork it. You were always moving it, and it was just something you got rid of. But here we are 45 or whatever years later, and I don't know that we look at manure the same. I certainly hope we don't. So I'd love you to put in the chat, if you were to have some adjectives to describe manure and the value that you attribute to it, what would they be? So put that in the chat and we can see how different folks see manure today compared to 45 years ago or so when I was a young lad. So what I'd like to do now is bring on Mel Luymes. And Mel has been with us in the past. Last year, she was on a couple of times, helping to moderate some discussions, a number of sessions. And Mel is the executive director of OPACA, which is the Ontario Professional Agri Contractors Association, and really neat organization that are doing work looking at custom application, looking at raising the bar in that whole industry. So Mel is going to be basically moderating the chat and the discussion today. She's got a panel with her, which I will let her introduce. And these folks are just going to be shooting the breeze around manure management and all aspects of it. I wouldn't be surprised if we go beyond 3 o'clock today. We have booked this call to 4 o'clock so that there's lots of time to chat. So at this point, I just want to turn it over to Mel, introduce her, and let her take it from there. Cheers.
Oh no, I'm spotlighted now. Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, welcome everyone to the second stop on the manure tour. Before I share my screen and we start talking, I do really want this to be interactive, and I've noticed that a few people have put in the chat some ideas, but I would love to hear more from you. So where are you from? Let's just, who here is from Northern Ontario? I'd be curious. Anyone from Northern Ontario on the call? Anyone from out east? I guess it's, how do you define it? Melissa's iPad is from out east. Excellent. Candy from out east. Ooh, David's from England. Sorry, I didn't even ask if you might be from another place. We had someone potentially from Progressive Dairy calling in from the States. Wisconsin, excellent. Yeah, right. If you're not even from Ontario, I'd love to hear that in the chat. Oh my goodness, Connecticut, Maine. How did you guys find out about this? This is great. Yeah, you might not have been able to join our tour otherwise. Excellent. Well, this is great, just to give us a sense of who's on the call. And Utah. Now, who's the furthest away? I guess England. If there's anyone further than England, let us know. So as I'd already started sharing this, but as Andrew mentioned, this is the second stop on our manure tour. We started out in Moorfield last week, and it was amazing because we had some lunch, and then we went on to see Simon Signer's aeration. It was under the barn aeration and a compost pack. And then we saw all the big toys at Pit King. But next week, and we still have spots, and even Americans are welcome. No, on February the 8th, on this week, Wednesday, we still have spots in Dashwood, and we'll be going to see Stone Creek, which is an amazing, huge dairy farm. They're using and recycling all their bedding with Bedding Master, and they're piping their liquid manure to their fields underground. And we'll also be seeing Van Ray's on-the-go manure sensing. And then Chemphil, if you want to go all the way out east, we'd love to have you out there. We're looking at Thurler's biodigester or Foster's in-crop manure. But OPACA is the Ontario Professional Agri Contractors Association, and we represent contractors, and about 50% of our contractors are manure contractors, so we get into a lot of manure conversations. And if you need a contractor, go to opaca.net and find one of ours. I wanted to open it up to Bruce Kelly, if you want to say a few words about Farm and Food Care, because this was a joint collaboration, and this was funded by the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs with Farm and Food Care. Bruce, you there to
Hi,
say
Mel.
a few words?
Hi, Mel.
Here, I'll
Thank
stop
you very
sharing.
much. Yep, Bruce Kelly on behalf of Farm and Food Care Ontario. Our office is in Guelph. Yeah, pleased to be part of this project. We've been working on it with OPACA since about last December and OMARFA. And this builds on other manure stewardship conversation projects, the Manure Mondays, Timing Matters projects that we've all been involved with. But I think this is particularly fun because I love conversations that are win-wins, and I really think that these conversations are win-wins. When we talk about using manure better and more efficiently from a dollars point of view, with hand in hand goes using it better for the soil and the environment, and reducing risks of runoff. And then when you weave in greenhouse gas, what we've learned that we can manage manure indeed and reduce greenhouse gas at the same time. I just think it's fun when dollars in the pocket and innovation and benefits for the soil all align. So yeah, I want to thank Mel for her great work working with OPACA. So my contribution to this project was during the past summer, we made 3 videos and a trailer. And that can serve as, just ways at meetings when we can start to talk about manure. So if you ever are looking to talk about manure or need stuff for a meeting, check out our videos. They're going to highlight a couple of them later on. But yeah, just want to be thankful to be part of this. I just think this project shows that when we're more efficient with manure, that it can be better for the soil and the environment too, and so that just makes it fun. And who doesn't love more technology? And so whether it's technology and how we handle it, store it, process it, treat it, and apply it, we've seen that there's room and there's people doing all kinds of great things. And Mel and I have had so much fun working with OPACA members and farmers and suppliers on new technologies, and it's been great. So take it away.
Thanks, Bruce. I even went to the Netherlands to learn about manure innovation, so maybe you'll hear a bit about that too. So I want to introduce our panel. Christine Brown is with OMARFA. She probably doesn't even need any explanation. She works in sustainability and she's at Manure Girl on Twitter if you don't follow her yet. So all things manure, we're glad to have Christine on our panel. She's actually going to every stop on the Manure tour with me. So we'll be great friends by the end of this. And Jim Denise from Denise Farms around the Park Hill area. He's got some piggies and he's been farming longer than he wants to admit. Right, Jim? And so he's dealing with liquid manure. Russ Barker is with CropQuest, so he's a nutrient management consultant and right around the Kirkton Woodham area. Anything more you wanted to add, Russ? You've been working in this for 20 years almost in nutrient management consulting.
Well, yeah, definitely. It's been over 20 years. And, I live in a predominantly heavy dairy, heavy poultry area. So those are the ones I have most experience with, and some swine and beef.
Oh, excellent.
But yeah, it's been quite a few years in this endeavor. Thanks, Mel.
Glad that you're here with us. And we've got Bert Roos from Roos Seven Hills Custom Work. On every panel, we try to have a consultant, a contractor, a farmer, and then Chris. But also solid and liquid, because they're very different animals, as we know. So Bert does a lot of custom manure handling and application with liquid manure, but you also have solid. And you've also been farming around here for 20 years. Bert, anything else you'd want to add? Oh no, you're muted. As if this has never happened before.
No, I think you covered it all. That's good. Thank you.
Beautiful. Okay. Well, we'll be hearing a lot from all of them over the course. Like, again, this is very much discussion based, but we really, same as in Moorfield, like we really moved the conversation based on the questions that were coming in. So please ask your questions right from the get-go. But in general, how I try to outline this conversation is we start in the barn and we work our way out. So we're starting with a barn, looking at storage, and then like taking a manure analysis. What does that really mean in terms of the value of manure? Like best case scenario. We're gonna look at some of those videos that Bruce was talking about. And then we start moving the manure out into application, the timing and the placement, and we'll be talking about that, the when and the where and the how of getting manure out. And then last, we'll start looking at like, what if you need to get manure off the farm? What is manure worth? And selling it. So I really am not going to share my screen unless I really have to. We only have a very few amount of slides. So I wanted to start with Jim and Bert. Like you've got barns and manure. What do they look like? What's the setup for you, and what type of pits do you have? Jim, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah. Well, up until I guess last fall, we were farrow to finish swine, and we've transitioned over just to wean finish. So we've got 3 barn sites. Most of our storage is under barn. We do have probably 20% of it is open pits. Yeah, just basic pig manure. That's it.
There's no bedding, right?
No.
Bert, what about you? With beef, what sort of bedding do you have, and with the customers that you deal with? You've probably dealt with all types of bedding and sand even. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we have our beef is on straw bedding or corn stalk or whatever we can get, I guess. And then we have an outdoor storage area if it overflows, but we usually try to bring it to the fields where it needs to get spread on right away over the winter period, and then when spring comes around, spread it over the field. But there's a lot of sand, liquid or hog manure, regular dairy manure, whatever you want to call it.
How do you? Sand was a big issue in Moorfield when we talked on the manure tour. But I'd be curious if anyone does want to talk specifically about sand, just like raise your hands, because it was an animal we didn't really solve that problem. Just we definitely have to look to our friends in the U.S. and the kind of the ways that they recover sand before it even hits the storage would be kind of a best practice. But yeah, bedding matters. Would you say, Bert?
Yeah, like the bedding, we are solid manure, right? So that's and that works good. It's just not the most efficient way of doing anything, but solid manure is very good for the fields. Like you see it in droughts area where like last fall was pretty dry last year. I think the ones that do get the solid manure, they stand up the longest for drought resistance.
Oh, interesting. Chris, would you say that's true?
Sorry, I missed that part.
No, I was gonna lean on Christine Brown because she's always got a a good answer on the spot, or Russ.
Sorry, Mel, I missed the question. My internet's
Good
kind of
God,
unstable.
Chris.
No,
Okay.
My internet's going in and out.
Yeah, no, that's the problem. And that's the best thing about doing this in person is we had 0 glitches. No, I thought that was really great when Bert said like that the solid manure, like it's got the bedding in it, but that bedding is also like better for the soil too. So is there a thought about, you know, resiliency in drought times with different types of manure?
Yeah, there were a couple of really interesting comments that were made last week at the Moorfield meeting. And one of them was just the organic matter that you're adding back. But the other one was compared to sand, the bedding does add a lot of potassium and a lot of, depending of course, there's variation in how quickly it was harvested and that kind of thing. But sand doesn't add any nutrients back where the straw does. And so somebody that was switching from the straw bedding to the sand really noticed that difference in the manure analysis. But the other one for sure is just adding the organic matter back and the soil resiliency.
Yeah. And when the nutrients are available would change that. Russ, what are your thoughts? Because you deal with lots of different types of farmers and manure.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's always compromises, and when you come into sand, the main reason dairymen use it is cow comfort and production, and you can't beat it from that point of view. Yeah. But it is a pain in the neck when it comes to in the tank and having to dispose of. And I know Andrew started talking there, and he mentioned about something that you have to get rid of. Well, that's in my view, that's kind of what sand is. It has to be dredged out of the bottom of the pit and you have to get rid of it. But in terms of its real value out in the field, it's pretty minimal.
Mm-hmm.
But the value of it is in the barn. So that's, we got to remember that's where it's used. That's why it's there.
Yeah. No, but there's definitely a lot to be learned from the States. Like they have these sand recovery lanes. They're recovering that sand. They're composting it essentially, not really, but reusing it in the barn. And so, especially with the cost of sand.
And I have a few clients that do that as well.
Yeah,
good. Yeah, that use sand lanes. And I've had one that runs a sand separator and that kind of thing. But they're the exception. Again, the majority of people let it go in the tank and then bring in the hi-ho to scoop it out every summer and just spread it as best they can. Bert would know about that, I would think.
Yeah.
Lots of fun.
Lots of fun. We talked about how like the sand, what is it, settles to the bottom, it's actually taking a lot of the solids. So it's not, you do have to really do a good job agitating those pits before you pump it.
And there's a decent amount you get out by agitation, but you just can't get it all.
Mm-hmm.
One of the comments that one of the contractors made a few years ago was where they used the hi-ho and took the sand to the fields. It really was important how it was spread. And so if it was spread in the same field year after year, fairly thick, it really started interfering with the natural drainage of that field and started causing some drainage issues, some problems just with the soil. So it's, we were talking about this at the meeting last week, and it's the better you can agitate it and cover it evenly over the field, probably better in the long run for the soil.
Yeah, we also, I just want to share this and get people's thoughts. Sorry. How much do you think this pit of manure is worth? It's 14 foot by 160 foot, and it's dairy manure. I just want to pop this up here and pop in the chat. How much do you think this is worth? I want to hear your thoughts. $200,000. Okay, Anthony. $1 million. Sorry. I guess if people are watching this webinar later, one, I'm sorry. Two, how many gallons are in this? What did we say? It was 2 million?
About 2 million.
Bert?
Yeah, 2 million, I think.
This is Bert's equipment, not his pit, but this is him pumping out.
That's the agitator that we use to mix it.
Yeah. How long do you agitate before you start?
2 hours, mostly.
Okay.
And then you keep agitating as you pump the whole time. Otherwise, the sand still settles down.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a sand.
Yeah.
Pit. Come on, people, more thoughts. I'm only getting jokes so far. You'll be stinking rich. Thank you. That is good. $40,000. Anything else? 30,000. Come on. We should give a prize to the person that's closest because we did the math. I'll take one more bid. Come on. You ready? Whatever the receiver will pay. That's not untrue. And I guess we're going to talk about that later when we talk about how to value manure. It really is like, it depends. No, well, this is interesting because we had guesses in Moorfield of like 2,000, 3,000. Here we're getting, it looks like Dave Jones is the closest so far. 120. Wayne Metzger. Well, Wayne, I would hope that you know exactly what this is worth. It's $130,000. But Wayne came the closest, but only sarcastically. Okay, I'll get you a prize, Wayne. So yeah, I want to lob this over to Chris Brown because she did the math on this. And now that was dairy, but now we're looking at liquid finisher hog manure. And you just want to talk about how you came up with those numbers, Chris, and were those with today's fertilizer prices?
Yeah, they were with last year's fertilizer prices. So the price of nitrogen's gone down a wee bit. So this will be a little bit higher than maybe what it is today. But one thing that I really want to make clear is that the value of the manure is never higher than when it's in the storage. Well, maybe when it's coming right out of the animal, but once it goes to the field, management is going to decrease this value. So management does make a difference. But what I did here was just take the available nutrients based on best management and convert the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and the potassium into fertilizer equivalents, because we always talk about manure from a value per 1,000 gallons or per ton, but that doesn't give the same impact as what you look at what's in the storage. And so when we look at it from a fertilizer equivalent, $80,000 for just over 1 million gallons is a lot of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And that doesn't even include the micros or the organic matter.
Yeah. Any other thoughts from the panel or the participants? Any thoughts on this?
Well, I think it just certainly reflects the value that's in there, the dollars involved. Now you still have to move it and truck it and deal with it. But there's a sizable amount of change left over that, and it's over and above just the dollars on an NPK basis. You've got the micros and the organic matter and all those other terrific biological activity that comes with manure, and you really can't even put a price on that. It goes way over and above the NPK value.
Yeah.
Yeah, the other thing that
And-
sometimes that you sometimes think is that handling manure is part of the livestock part of the business. And so we're buying nutrients to feed the animals. This is a byproduct of feeding those animals and selling milk or eggs or meat. But the better job we do in handling this resource, the more money in our pocket at the end of the day.
Mhm. And Dave, assuming Dave in the chat said management and the crop stage will affect the value too. So that's a good point, is like when you use it, how you use it determines the value that you're going to get from it, not just the nutrient value, but the value to the crops. But if it's not utilized, how much does it cost to get rid of? Best to utilize it. Yeah, good point. I want to just move right along onto, well, no, I actually am curious, does because fertilizer prices went up so crazy amount, did you see a change in how people were managing and using their manure to try to make the most of it? I'd be curious. Maybe I'll stop sharing just for a quick second and have a discussion about that. Just, and from the audience too, like thoughts, or you can also put up your hand, and I think we can call on anyone to speak if your audio works. But to the panel, have you changed how you manage manure in the past few years? Or have you seen it?
We've been trying to get away from spreading in the spring, just time constraints, labor, compaction, all that stuff. And a lot of times you start drag lining and you get 3 weeks of rain and equipment sitting out there, and you basically lost a lot of value of manure. But we started going to spreading in the summer after we on a actually growing cover crop. But with fertilizer prices where they are, or maybe going back, we're going to try and figure out how we can do it more efficiently in the spring again, to utilize that in the corn instead. As much as we can, I guess.
Yeah, I guess we'll talk about that in application too. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, we've been seeing people truck it farther. Where it used to be all around the farm, and now they go farther. Yeah, you notice a difference.
Okay, so I'm just catching up on the chat too. Oh, and Larry Behringer. Hi, Larry. He said, as commercial fertilizer prices are rising, our customers have pressed us for more precision applications. So Larry does a lot of custom application there too. So that's interesting. More precision application. Does that mean the timing, Larry, or placement? What's precision application? Does that mean injection? I'll wait for his fingers, or you can unmute yourself, Larry. Yes, you're not going to say no. You're not going to say anything. What did precision application mean for you?
Precision application means quite a few different things. It means taking manure farther away from the storage tank to reach fields. Thus, we get into 1.5 miles, 2 miles, 3 miles away from the storage tank that we run with our drag hose. Definitely timing, especially on alfalfa fields. As soon as the hay's off, we're on there as soon as we can. And we can do a lot of good things with a drag hose, but I'll let you know a secret that nobody ever talks about. We can do a lot of bad things with the drag hose too if we want to. So, so our focus has been, we never do a job that is good enough. We're always trying to find little ways to increase the quality of our job. We made some changes in the last 3 years. When you see the video, you can see some of them. But we're always trying to fine tune our application. We've got a new machine we're coming out with this spring that'll just put us one more step along the road to more precision spreading. So that's about it.
What's that?
It's like Christmas time, Mel. You'll have to wait and see.
I'll just have to wait and see. Okay, fine. Fine. Okay. We've got a few more great comments coming in, Adam. The value is a good point. The value also depends if the land needs the NP and K. So there's always that balance. If you already have high levels, then the best value is just to get rid of them, like to sell that manure to someone and to have land that does need it. Deb Campbell, ooh, will be a good one. High demand for manure. Folks do want to buy it. Yeah, that's a good point. So we need to figure out how to connect buyers and sellers. That's a great point. Nutrient sheds are one potential avenue. Collect. Ooh, split up into nutrient, water, and biogas generation. Okay, we're gonna have to talk about that later too. And then Christina O'Reilly says OntarioHayListings.ca has an option for manure exchange. It's definitely something that we wanted to talk about. I want to shift gears quick and try to get this video set up for you so you can watch the first one of these videos.
Investing in proper manure storage and handling systems is critical for a successful livestock operation. Livestock farmers know that manure is rich in organic matter, microbiological activity, and varying amounts of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and a host of micronutrients. Depending on how the manure is stored and handled, a lot of that value can be lost before it even gets to the field. When natural enzymes in manure meet the urea in urine, it begins to off-gas the nitrogen as ammonia, and in liquid manure pits, there is no oxygen at the bottom. In this anaerobic environment, the breakdown products of the microbes include methane, which can be lost as a gas, especially in the hotter months. A manure storage tank is in some ways like an active yogurt culture. If the tank is not emptied completely, the microbes remaining in the tank will incorporate into the incoming manure and speed up this breakdown process to methane. You can, in fact, reduce the methane produced during storage by up to 55% by completely emptying the tank with each pump out. Storage management does matter. Here are 3 things we can do to reduce manure volumes and methane release. Cover the storage, acidify, or aerate. If you don't have under-barn storage, a cover on a pit can reduce odors and off-gassing anywhere from 30 to 90%. For liquid pits, even the crusty layer or a blown layer of chopped straw works to reduce methane release. A roof over solid manure helps keep manure cooler and the rainwater out, reducing dilution. Remember to divert clean roof, yard, and eaves trough water away from the storage because pumping extra water is the biggest waste of money in regards to manure handling. The microorganisms that off-gas methane and nitrogen need a certain pH to work. Farmers in Denmark commonly lower the pH. During liquid manure spreading, concentrated sulfuric acid is added to the flow of liquid manure from a tank mounted in the front of the tractor. The system measures the liquid's manure pH in real time and adds precisely the quantity of acid required to reach the target pH of roughly 6.0. The system is easy to retrofit to existing tankers and spreading equipment and can reduce nutrient losses by 50%. Since most of this off-gassing happens in an anaerobic environment, why don't we add oxygen like a fish tank? New systems are being used for aerating liquid manure pits and underbarn storage, which reduces carbon loss, keeps solids in suspension, and, surprisingly, reduces odors in the barn. Similarly, solid manure can be aerated and turned, and dairy farmers are doing this right in the barn with composted, bedded pack barns. These new ideas may someday reshape the entire process of barn and storage design. Manure and storage technology is always evolving, and there is no doubt that barns, storages, and equipment in the future will look different than today's systems. Researchers have shown that with minor changes, we can better manage today's systems, and new technology can help us further reduce nutrient losses, making our manure even more valuable and our practices even more environmentally sound.
I hope that played okay. No one said anything. Yeah, that was Vocal saying that's got the Siri N that with the sulfuric acid on the front. And I think that was in Germany, but in Denmark, it's really common practice to put the sulfuric acid, I guess, into the storage tank, which we think might be dangerous. But I wanted to share just even the idea of covering the storage, because this is it's a great point. Goodness gracious, I need to share the screen again. These are Jim's manure analysis that he is so graciously sharing with us. And I thought we would have a quick discussion about this because this is a finisher manure when it's under the barn or outside. Jim, do you want to speak to it a little bit?
Yeah, so I guess the top one there is finisher manure out of an outside open pit, and the bottom one is out of a closed pit. So we can see a pretty drastic difference in the nitrogen value, especially.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and big difference in how they pump too. Like the under barn storage is probably twice as thick.
Wow.
You can see that with the dry matter percentage in there. Certainly makes the pump work for sure.
Do you mix them together somehow? Like in
sometimes if we've got labor and the extra tractor around and pumps and stuff to do it, we will pump if we can, we will pump the under barn storage into the open pit while we're spreading. If we can do that and keep it agitated. And then as well, there's the other one with the sow manure. If possible, we will mix that, but it's pretty tough the way we're set up to do that.
Yes, the next slide is the sow barn.
Yeah, which is basically
what's going on here.
Yeah, a lot of wash water.
A lot of wash water, eh?
Lots of washing in the sow barn, so it's.
So you mix this, or like at this point, you could irrigate.
Well, at this point, we don't have cells anymore, so we don't have to deal with this water.
Oh, you don't.
Yeah.
So that's another way to deal with it is don't have sows anymore. Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
Great.
But just to do a comparison, if you look at less than 1% dry matter, that means that you've got 99% water. And if you've got a storage that's going to last you for 30 years, or I don't know what the typical timeline is, but that's a lot of water at, let's say, $15 per 1,000 gallons that you're spreading. And it's pretty tough to make the economics work on that. So it's trying to reduce the water volume in manure is definitely going to concentrate the nutrients better if it's workable into the system.
Yeah. Well, and while you're talking, Chris, do you want to keep talking about this is again with a dairy example of just covered and not covered?
Yeah, this was just using the AgriSuite M store and doing an apples to apples comparison of the same type of manure with just different storage options. And so with uncovered, you've got a lot more water, you've got less concentrated nutrients compared to where it's covered, and then covered, but taking the wash water and handling the wash water in either a different storage or as irrigation. Like it depends on what kind of systems they've got. But this is just to show how much difference it makes when you're not transporting water and when you're concentrating those nutrients so that you're taking higher nutrient volumes to the field in each load instead of the water. Russ, I'd be interested to hear if you come across this in any of your nutrient management plans.
Yeah.
Well, it is becoming
Or I'll
more
take us back here.
just the cost of trucking water in manure is becoming a larger talking point. And I keep coming back. Again, I'll come to my compromise comment before. And I'm thinking dairy barns here in particular. It works quite well in swine, having them covered. That's the typical way of doing it. In a dairy, in barn pits and dairies are not cheap. You got an air quality thing that traditionally has been involved, but I'm intrigued. I do have one client that's got one of these. He just built the barn last year. He does have a barn with that aeration system in it. I think that's what you saw last week at that farm tour you were on, an in-barn aeration with liquid manure under the barn.
Yeah.
And if that indeed works the way it's advertised in terms of reducing methane and reducing odor, you come back, it will improve worker and animal comfort inside a barn. Traditionally, we moved it outside just to get it the heck out of Dodge in terms of being in the barn. And it's
Oh, I thought it was
simple. It works.
It's simple.
Right at the barn level from a management point of view, it works. Circular tanks are easier to agitate and to get the full value of everything in the tank out into the field. And it boils down to producer preferences, but there is no question with the cost of spreading going up, there's more interest in covered liquid storages. Covered solid storage is, of course, we've been working with covered solid storage for a long time. It's pretty well accepted in our neighborhood. Like outside uncovered solid manure storage is just are dumb.
Are down. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that.
And the Sigview farms that we did tour, it was only doing aeration and underground storage of just the front part, because the majority of it was still a compost pack. And that barn, like, I think I smelled better leaving the barn than when I came. Like, it's very great.
Yeah.
Like, the air quality is incredible in there.
Yeah. And if that indeed works, that could be a bit of a game changer in the way we look at in-barn storages and dairies. Yeah. We'll see. Yeah.
Well, because they're common in the Netherlands.
In all of Europe, and one of the interesting things with the aeration, and there's still some studying to do with how does it change the manure the manure concentration or the nutrient concentration, but the intermittent aeration, and intermittent means that they figure it's not aerating all the time. It's just one section of the manure storage at a time for a certain amount of periods of time. But the manure never goes anaerobic, so you don't have those odors. And if it doesn't go anaerobic, you're not getting the hydrogen sulfide either, which is one of those toxins that's very dangerous to when people are emptying their storage. The research in Europe suggests that you get methane reduction of 30 to 50%. And one of the farms that has used the system for the past 8 years near Woodstock has said that for him, this intermittent aeration is treating the liquid storage a lot more like a compost pile, where you've got the microorganisms active in working with the carbon and making those nutrients more available. So it's an interesting system and one that I think deserves more research in Ontario.
We've got a little conversation in the chat that I want to address, but I still have it holding to Jim's manure. Russ, was there anything that you wanted to add on to this? Like covered versus uncovered, what does that mean?
Well, I would say covered versus uncovered. Covered manure offers advantages of, I guess I would say, and I'm thinking salt manure here, maybe more so, consistency of nutrients. Certainly nutrient density is better in covered storage, is what this shows. For every 1,000 gallons, you're just getting far more bang for your buck with covered storages. And if we ever lived in areas where our rainfall, I think I saw in the chat, some areas up to 100 inches, was that I noticed in the chat?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to address.
That's 3 times the rainfall that we have in our area. And that would sure make us look at open manure storages a lot differently if we had that much water to have to fight with. So there's no question rainfall, annual precipitation makes a big difference. And anybody with an open tank knows that too. You go through a really wet summer and open tanks soon fill up a heck of a lot quicker than obviously a cover tank would. Yeah, water, if you can keep water out of manure from a practical point of view, it pays a lot of different dividends.
Yeah. And that was Tom Thompson. That was his point. It's cheaper to prevent water entry than removing it. But where do you live, Tom? I'm curious if you can unmute yourself and chime in there. Tropical.
Unmute. There, can you hear it? Where I go?
Oh, it's
Echo.
pretty bad. Well, try it again.
Am I echoing now?
No, that sounds good.
Okay, it's not from Mars. No, in Tillamook, Oregon, and I'm sure up in DC too, that northwest coast, we get a lot of rain. We have a lot of outside tanks, 100 by 16. So that kind of rainfall falling on the tanks plus processed water, and then the other water you get inside really adds to the conglomeration.
Oh, I bet. Yeah. I was about to Google what's the town called? Tillamook?
Oh, Tillamook. It's down in Oregon off the coast.
Yeah, that is tropical. Interesting. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. And then what about evaporation? Yeah, that was another question. Like, what's going on? I was about to call on Christine, but now her video's off.
Well, I turned the video off just to try and get better
Bandwidth.
quality.
Yeah.
The M store that's part of AgriSuite that we use to calculate storage volumes, it takes into consideration different parts of Ontario and what the average rainfall and evapotranspiration is. So that's all calculated in that storage, how much manure is produced in a year.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Interesting.
wouldn't say that there's more evaporation than there is water. In the summer, there's probably more evaporation than there is in the winter. But I think we still need a certain amount of freeboard for the winter.
Mm-hmm. What about, let's talk about the NH3 retention. Okay, Jason Oliver's got this great question. With a covered liquid manure storage required an impervious cover or roof? Are you trapping gases when you cover a manure storage? If so, how do you deal with that? Discuss.
Well, any kind of covered storage needs still, it's not a sealed storage. It does need ventilation to just from a practical point of view.
Okay.
There's still going to be some ammonia loss. The ammonia loss and also the methane loss is going to be the highest in the summer months when the bacteria are the most active and when you've got the hot conditions. So even John Lozon and Claudia Wagner-Riddle, they did some research on storages, and John was saying that even where you've got a windbreak around the storage that prevents the sun and the amount of higher temperature from the sun is going to prevent some of that ammonia loss and some of that methane loss. But
yeah, it's a temperature thing, right, Christine? It's a temperature thing. The cooler you can keep it, the lower the rate of methane and gas conversion. And that's the advantage of being covered or protected, as you say. It's not meant to, sealing it up is that's a bad thing.
Unless you're doing like a digester or something like that. Like, Chris, I want to share that your screen now about the when to empty the storage. But there is a great question about gypsum bedding and hydrogen sulfide that I almost completely forgot. So I wanted to just stop everything and talk about it. It was quite a few minutes ago in the chat. Do you use gypsum bedding in Canada? And do you have concerns from hydrogen sulfide? Do we? No. Any thoughts, Christine?
There are people that have used it.
Mhm.
I don't know very much about it. It's not, I don't think it's highly recommended.
Mhm.
I think you end up with some mush. I don't know about the hydrogen salt. I'm sure that there are people on the call that could answer that better than me.
Leaning in,
Doesn't have
is
to
there
do with,
anyone?
Doesn't have to do with gypsum bedding, but being a hog barn, I mean, hydrogen sulfide is always a concern. So
Yeah.
like it'll kill you like that, or it's, at a low level, it's really hard on all the equipment, especially electronics. That's why everything's got to be sealed. So.
Right. Right. Was that Michael? Do you want to unmute yourself and like chime in there with?
Sure. Can you hear
There
me?
you are. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so in Pennsylvania, we some of our farmers use gypsum bedding just because it was cheaper, and not realizing that that has a chemical reaction and causes more hydrogen sulfide. So we've had a few deaths as a result of that. So I was just wondering, so we've started to move away more from that, just because that, and it usually happens during agitation of the manure, so that it lifts up, but it's heavier than air. So it lifts up, it comes over the walls, and then usually affects the person if they're still in the tractor or something like that when they're agitating. And then we've had even affect small kids just riding their bike across the lane during the agitation. Some of them have passed out just from that.
My goodness.
And so we've had cows that have died as well. So I work for the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture with the manure hauler section, but Penn State here has done a lot of research on that. And so we've been doing a lot of safety trainings on that. And I just wasn't sure if it was just a United States type of thing, or if other places have gone into gypsum bedding. If not, it might be something to stay away from if you guys aren't aware of that, or something like that.
Yeah, good to know. And Dave Jones put a link in the chat there. I guess if people are watching the recording later, we'll try to put the links there for you. Jason, did you have something to add there? There you are. Still have to unmute yourself though.
Sorry. Yep.
All
Can
good.
you hear me okay now?
Yeah.
Cool. So I'm at Cornell, so deal mostly with dairies in New York State. We see people sprinkle gypsum on bedding, I think, to help dry it out to some extent, but not full on gypsum bedding. I also was asking about the impervious covers because we actually see more interest in impervious covers than other types of systems for dairies. So the state is really encouraging a rollout of impervious covers for a sort of a greenhouse gas mitigation standpoint, so cover and flare systems. But we've had early adopters really interested for the water exclusion, ammonia retention kind of strategies, but they're expensive and can be a real management pain for manure agitation, et cetera.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious for anyone else from anywhere else, what they're doing. Pop it in the chat and sorry, just looking at the chat. And it is 3 o'clock, which technically means that you might have to go, but we're well prepared to keep going for another half an hour or an hour. So so please stay, but if you do have to go, I understand. We'll miss you. But I wanted to talk a little bit about this. Chris, do you want to talk about the research that went behind this? And I think it's important to say that, like, or is it true that if you smell it, you've lost it? Like, we're looking at it from a greenhouse gas perspective, but this is also your nitrogen. This is also your carbon, and that's also your value that's gassing off too. So Christine, tell us a little bit about this slide and what we're looking at here.
Well, this was one that was presented last week when James did his presentation on greenhouse gas emissions, but this was one that I think a number of people found really interesting because it does two things. It shows the benefit not only of nutrients, but also from a greenhouse gas perspective of spreading that manure to growing crops, because we're going to benefit the most with our nutrients when we apply them to crops that can utilize the nutrients. But here in the top part of the picture, you've got a storage that's emptied only in the fall. And so the highest greenhouse gas emissions, methane, happens during the summer months when it's warm and the microbiology are active and you're getting a lot of methane. So and this is, I think, a study that Claudia was involved in, but where they emptied the storage in the spring, and again, ahead of where crops can use it, and hopefully on soils where you weren't causing a lot of compaction, but it takes a while for the volume to build up, for the anaerobic conditions to start, for the microorganisms that go anaerobic to start gassing off. And it wasn't a big difference when it was early in the spring versus, I would say, probably after first cut hay or after a cut of hay. Both of those reduced the methane reduction by about 25%. Now, if it was emptied in the spring and again in the fall, you're continuing that reduction in methane emissions, and it was reduced to about 40%. So this is kind of a solution that maximizes the nutrients, but also reduces the greenhouse gases. And this is something that's not going to be really, really expensive if you've got your own manure application equipment and if you have to call in a custom applicator. But to me, this is a relatively simple solution that is going to make a little bit of a difference.
Mm-hmm. Any thoughts on that?
Well, what governs the time, or what determines the time that you empty your tanks is based on two things. It's based on the amount of storage you have. It's based on the land base, whether you have enough land to include things like wheat into your rotation, which allows you to put manure out in the late summer, the latter part of the summer, plant your cover crops, your forage crops after that. And in the spring, it's as I think I said before in our preamble, my neighbors and livestock neighbors and people I work with, we're actually trying to reduce the amount of manure you're putting on in the spring, just because of the detrimental effect of compaction. And the drag line was mentioned. I kind of smiled when he said, yeah, you can do a lot of damage with drag line too. And yeah, if you don't know what you're doing, you sure can. So I think this is great. It helps a lot. It will certainly help me in the discussions you have with producers in this methane reduction, greenhouse gas reduction. Is it going to change people's, at least in my area, is it going to change their approach? I don't think so. But it's good to know.
It just on paper, it makes sense. But I mean, when you look at the spring fall application, minus 40%, like Russ said, you're paying for that in other ways. You might be reducing your emissions there, but you're probably in the fall, you're probably, I don't know many guys willing to wait until fall to spread around here because you're probably going to be doing it in the mud. And then what happens to those nitrates when there's no actively growing crop or heavy rainfalls, that kind of thing, you're gonna end up in the lake. So I don't know, greenhouse gas emissions may be down, but you're putting more into the watershed for sure.
I think on the heavy clay soils, you do get a lot of people applying manure after soybean harvest or after corn harvest. There's a lot of manure that goes out at that time of year. And I agree, Jim, that's a potential, especially if it's a wet, cold spring for nitrous oxide losses. But there's a lot of people that do some spreading in the spring and some in the fall as well, just for storage capacity and that kind of thing. But what I like about this is there's a lot of dairy farmers that are already applying after first cut, after second cut, after third cut. And yes, you're compromising with some ammonia loss, but you're adding the nutrients, phosphorus, the potassium to the crop when it needs it, and potentially reducing some of those greenhouse gas emissions. Same with where you've got wheat and cover crops. So there's places where it's going to work. There's some places where it's not going to make sense.
Yeah. But definitely, yeah, something to keep in mind. And it sounds like we're all balancing the practicality and like what's good for the air. Is it good for the soil? Is it good for the water? What's good for phosphorus? Is that good for nitrogen? Like it's pretty complex farming. This was everyone's favorite slide from the last session. So I wanted to pause here and have a talk because now we're moving out from the barn, out from the storage and into application and looking at some of the toys that we use to get it out in good time and in different places. But this is just looking at what are you actually applying. This is, again, best case scenario under best management practices. If we took those manure values at the rates that they're applied, and this was like nothing was lost to the environment, this is kind of what we're looking at. I'll just pause to let the panel or anyone else just kind of reflect on what you're seeing here.
Well, I'll make one comment just from the start, and that is that this is based on it's looking at nitrogen application, and in some cases, like the broiler manure, if you applied 4.5 tons every single year, you would be over applying phosphorus by a huge amount. So this rate for broiler manure reflects a once in rotation, so once every 3 years kind of thing. So how this gets applied is really going to depend on how often you're applying it in the rotation that you've got.
Yeah. Context. Thank you, Chris. Russ?
Well, I have a question too, and Jim, you could help me out here a bit, but I have one very large swine producer. He keeps telling me that he has trouble maintaining his phosphorus content. And if you look at this, the book says 104 pounds of phosphorus. I realize only 40% is available, but his nutrient content from a phosphorus point of view is lower than what it traditionally has been. What is he telling me the right story, Jim, or what do you think?
Yeah, you broke up part of that, but I think I kind of got it. Yeah, looking at this here under the hog manure, that p-value seems awfully high.
Yeah.
I know when they switched to the phytase in the hog feed, it was probably 15 years ago now. It dropped the phosphorus levels in the manure down roughly 75% from where they were before. So yeah, like if my own, I know on 4,000 gallons, my nitrogen would be much higher than 160. It'd probably be close to 300 from the covered storage anyways. And then the P would probably be down, top of my head, closer to 70.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that the 80% or 40%? Is that the full value or just half the value?
No, that would be the I think that would be the full off the top of my head.
Because one of the things that we noticed in the data collection from collecting manure samples for the database is that when they started using phytase, the amount of phosphorus in the manure went down, and then it slowly started going up again. And so there's two things. One, they use phytase, but they don't reduce the phosphorus in the diet by enough. Or the second thing, when DDGs were starting to be fed, so that's the byproduct from the ethanol, the digester grains, the phosphorus level started going up again. So that was two things that we noticed. However, in the last version of updating the database, the phosphorus levels have come down in almost every livestock type.
Yeah, I think if you're balancing your ration properly, and you're putting phytase in, you should drastically reduce what you're putting in the feed. because it's too expensive to put in there when it's not needed for the animal, but.
Yeah. And Deb Campbell is echoing your statements. The additives in feed are really reducing P levels, and manure field levels have declined substantially.
Yeah.
Deb would love to hear more from you if you want to unmute yourself and your experience working with your growers.
And it used to be that phosphorus was a limiting factor to spreading manure, and like it's
Interesting.
now I'm getting more potassium and definitely more
Really
nitrogen factor now. So
interesting.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, you know, it's pretty, I don't know, heartbreaking's not the right word, but shocking.
Heartbreaking is the right word.
For a hog producer to go from high soil test levels to low soil test levels and having to support his phosphorus level by adding fertilizer. Yeah. And that happened in, you know, about an 8-year span. It was quick, very quick.
Interesting.
Yeah. The other thing you want to keep in mind, and whenever Jim hangs out, and for sure Bert, our yield levels that we're currently punching out of cornfields, 200 bushel corn, 55, 60 bushel soybeans, 100, 110 bushel wheat. Like, we've got a pretty serious, then silage corn around dairies and alfalfa. Like, you've got a really significant nutrient draw that you're pulling out of soils, far greater than it was even 15, 20 years ago. And so it's not as easy to pull soil nutrient levels up with manure as it maybe used to be.
We noticed that with forages, like if you've got a 3 or 4 cut system with good alfalfa yields, you can easily reduce the potash levels in the soil test by 35 parts per million, and that's only with the alfalfa portion. So this is where the AgriSweep field crop balance, where you're putting in your nutrients from manure and your fertilizers, and then over that full rotation, you get a pretty good idea of how much you're shorting some of the nutrients, especially potash in some cases.
Yeah, like Russ said, like we definitely couldn't maintain our P levels in our soils on manure alone. We'd be dumping so much nitrogen in the watershed that we'd have to spread it sulfate to get the P levels up.
Some people like it that the phosphorus is lower because it means they can put more nitrogen on.
What?
Yeah.
Some people, if their application rate is limited because of the phosphorus, then by having lower phosphorus, they can up the rate for the phosphorus and put on more nitrogen.
Yeah, whatever. You can twist numbers. You can spin numbers however you wish.
Russ's official opinion, whatever. Tom has got a question. Maybe did we address it? Tom says, doesn't 5 days decrease the test values, but proportion of the soluble P increase? Is there anyone that can answer that on the panel, or even in the audience? I'd be curious if anyone's got some thoughts on that.
I couldn't hear the question.
Oh, it's in the chat. Doesn't 5 days decrease the test values, but proportion of the soluble P increase? Or is there, Tom, do you want to rephrase it? Are you still here?
I'm muted here. I just had heard or read somewhere that the test value would go down, but the proportion of soluble phosphorus, which is minor but still there, would increase. And I don't know if anybody had heard that or could comment on that.
I'm not sure. It's plausible that it would, but that wouldn't matter if you're incorporating it and not like it, as long as that phosphorus doesn't run off or get lost into the environment. Does it matter if more of it's soluble? I'm asking the question. I don't know the answer.
Hardly at all. Won't make significant amount of difference. Just because of the way phosphorus is released, held in within, released within the soil. Regular higher calcium soils, they gobble up phosphorus pretty quick and then release it much slowly. That's what the plant actually uses for the majority. It's kind of strikes me, I don't know everything about it either, but it always strikes me this kind of soluble P is the old debate with liquid fertilizers and phosphorus liquid fertilizers and polyphosphates versus orthophosphates, and it's a tempest in a teapot as far as my opinion on that. 6 of one, half of another, and I think when you get into this business about whether phosphorus is more soluble this way or that way, or less soluble, I don't think it really makes a significant difference to the crop or to your soil test levels.
Do you think it makes a difference how the soil health impacts the nutrient cycling, and that's probably a bigger function of having the nutrients available for the crop?
You mean from the standpoint of having a more vigorous crop?
Well, just if you've got good organic matter levels, good microorganisms, or high functioning microorganisms levels in the soil, not having it compacted, isn't that nutrient cycling going to help to ensure that you've got nutrients there for the crops when the crops need them?
Yeah, I guess.
That's what I'm banking on, but it's hard to quantify again, so.
Yeah.
Shall we move on to application and how that how to get the manure out? Yeah, we get to look at equipment. I just want to, I hope this plays okay. It's a bit choppy regardless, but this is Bert's rig turning around. Bert, do you want to describe what we're looking at here?
We just received this last fall, the first time we tried it here. The idea of that is that you transfer your weight from the hose, so all your pull comes over top of your whole tractor. So that way you can put traction on all 4 wheels, and you can get away with a lot lighter tractor in the same application. So in this way, we're trying to minimize compaction and be able to get on the grounds a little bit sooner and do less damage or no damage.
Yeah. Well, what kind of equipment are you working? Oh, I can't even see anyone. What kind of equipment are you working with to get the liquid manure out in general? Like what do your customers want, and when do you normally put it out, etc.?
Yeah, for us, the bulk of the manure goes out in the spring before planting. And all they really want then is the Dragos. Like manure tank is pretty much phased out till after first cut. And then you do tankers after haylage. It's always tankers. Summer is a lot of tankers. Fall, depending on the weather, tankers or dragline. But usually, like last fall was a nice dry fall. Everybody went far away from home. Just trucked it to the next farm. Trucked it to, because we could. We did it. Otherwise, it usually stays closer. But
okay, because you had that time last
there was
fall.
time. There was no compaction issues this fall, right? It was super nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, the majority wants the Dragos.
Yeah. And do you agree you can do some damage with a drag hose? You
can, if you were to get out there too soon. And I think if you start using too big of a Dragos, you also gonna do that. They're now pulling 7 inches around when, well, the only way to do that is a big articulator with, I don't know, 20,000 kgs. I do think that is backwards. I mean, the whole idea of drag lining goes south then, I think. The idea of drag hosing is stay light, get your manure on early, and go in and plant later. I think with that bigger, it's very nice. You get the job done fast, and you make a lot more money that way. But the idea of drag lining is to stay light and do no soil compaction.
Yeah. If Larry's around, I want to bug him later about his thoughts, but I wanted to lob it over to Jim. What are you, when do you get manure out? Because you get creative.
So we like to take it out as much as we can in the summer.
Mhm.
We'll put it on a actually growing cover crop. Or if, depending on the weather and the timing, sometimes we'll put the manure down before we plant, and ideally we'd like to put it on top of the actually growing cover crop.
Mhm.
And in the spring, we let our cover crop stay green over the winter and strip till in the fall. What you see there on the left picture would be,
Oh, sorry, I changed the slide. I went back. There we go.
oh yeah, so the left picture there's us drag line onto that cover crop in the spring. And on the right, that's not the same field, but that's kind of what it looks like after drag line, about a week after, something like that. In the spring, and then we just plant right into that. But then the next slide is
Now I'll move it.
yeah, so that's kind of how we do it. So we'll plant our cover crop typically close to the second week of August after the wheat's off. And then we'll let it grow a bit, and we'll go in there and we'll preferably drag line, but we can't reach all the field drag line, so we will do tanking as well. And then the bottom left there, you'll see that's kind of when we're strip tilling. We try and do that mid-September. And just that's what the manure does to help your biomass and your cover crop grow. That's only planted about 32, 34 pounds of a mixture.
No way.
Yeah, just for the
That's
way the manure
incredible.
pushes that cover crop to produce biomass for you is incredible. It's without it, it wouldn't look like much at all. So the idea is to get that cycling in for following seasons, right?
Yeah.
There's your soil
And-
health.
Yeah, like to me, that's, well, they always say 1 + 1 is 3 with the cover crops and manure. You're getting
Yeah.
that's right soil health right there. But
And you notice we're also putting, when you strip till, we're putting dry fertilizer down too, because like I mentioned, you can't get your phosphorus needs out of manure.
yeah.
We'll put it down for a full corn, bean, wheat rotation.
Yeah. Huh. But Christine, like when I was looking at the AgriSuite software, does it really give a, I don't know how you're gonna answer this. Like the nutrient value when you put it on a living crop in the summer, does it account for the soil health aspect? Does it account for what we're seeing in this picture, or like what's going on there with those calculations?
Well, that's a good question. And I will say, no, it doesn't accurately, because we don't have the research data to put those numbers in, and it varies quite a bit. But what we do in AgriSuite is if the manure gets applied to the cover crop, then that is nitrogen that is not lost below the root zone through leaching. And so it basically gives you the same nitrogen credit as if you had applied it later when the soil temperatures are quite a bit cooler. There's a huge amount of research that needs to happen and is happening. Laura Van Eert is doing some that looks at when does the cover crop release that nitrogen. And so if you're putting the manure on a cover crop, then in theory, you're getting more biomass, and you're getting more biomass that has a higher nitrogen content with lower carbon to nitrogen ratio. So in theory, in the spring, it should release its nitrogen more quickly than a crop that doesn't have that manure. How much, how soon depends on so many other factors, but the biggest one is probably weather and moisture levels.
Yeah, I agree. It's all, it makes sense in theory, like you said. It's just how do you got to figure out how to measure it a little better, right?
I think the one thing that we can say for sure is that cover crops like oilseed radish or peas, they release their nitrogen too quickly in the spring compared to red clover that releases it more closely to when the corn crop needs it. And that's one of the things with manure, right? We know that these nutrients are being applied with the manure, but if it's a corn crop, is that nitrogen becoming available to that corn crop during that 6-leaf to tasseling stage when it needs it so badly? And that's going to be different with hog manure that has its nutrients available a lot more quickly. Digestate would be the same compared to a thicker dairy manure that has quite a bit of organic nitrogen in that composition.
Yeah. Bert, has there been a lot of push for in-crop application on corn for custom guys?
Not under my customers so much yet. The timing is a bit of a problem there.
Yeah.
You only have a few weeks, if you get 2 weeks, and if it's kind of rainy that period of time, you're too late. And how are you going to apply? You need tankers with skinny wheels. It can't be too big, so your capacity goes down. Yeah, it's a hard one. It's a very tough one to make that work.
Yeah.
It's one where that Cadman CMA system is nice if your fields were long enough and if you can afford it. Can I make one other comment though about, this is something that I was going to mention earlier when we were talking about manure value. When we're testing manure, one of the things that we discovered kind of by accident is that pH is really important to measure in manure. And anaerobic digestate almost always has really high pH. Pig manure sometimes, I haven't figured out what the common denominator is. I think it's DDGs to some extent, but you've got some manures that are very high pH with pig manure. That in itself doesn't matter so much, except that it really affects how you manage it. And if you're looking, if you've got a manure that's high in ammonia content and you're hoping to get the credit from that nitrogen, then a high pH manure needs to be incorporated more quickly. You lose a lot of that nitrogen a lot more quickly if it sits on the soil surface. And so just for example, where we measured it, anaerobic digestate at a pH of almost 8 lost just as much of its ammonia as a dairy manure at just under 7 lost in a week, just as a comparison. Now that was in early June, and it depends on weather, of course. The warmer it is, the more you lose, the more quickly you lose it. But that's just, if you know what your pH is, and if you know that the pH is high, then incorporating it more quickly is going to be important in trying to reduce the nitrogen loss or utilize more of it.
Yeah. And
that makes sense. That makes a bit of sense to me. I have a client that has a digester, dairy for the most part, and we've had a couple of debates, but he's always maintained that, and he's done enough of his own trials, he's always maintained that his digestate in the spring, despite the fact that it's such a high octane product from a nutrient point of view, that his loss is due to ammonia loss without getting it incorporated, drastically reduces the actual value of that manure in terms of fertilizer value for the corn crop. He'll swear it's exactly just what you said, Christine. And he's had digesters for I'd say close to 10 years.
Yeah, that digestate or the finisher hog manure, like the one that Jim showed with his analysis, that's beautiful for in-crop application if you could do it just at the right timing, or for organic farms that don't have access to commercial nitrogen. High octane stuff.
Yeah. So you've got to incorporate it right away, or I'm curious too about injection.
Well, injection is the nicest. In that video that you showed earlier, where they had the Siren N or the sulfur that they were adding at application timing, that was where they were surface applying it with a dribble hose because they weren't injecting it, and that by lowering that pH, they were reducing the amount of nitrogen that they lost. Incorporation is still probably the best, but you have to have soil conditions that aren't too wet. You're not causing compaction, and you've got to try and get it on at the right time, just like what Bert was saying earlier. And that time window sometimes makes that a little bit difficult. That's why incorporation after wheat is also a nice option.
Yeah, a little bit difficult. I wonder if Larry wants to chime in too about if he's getting requests for in-crop into corn, or if he's doing any injection work. Larry, are you there still?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
One wet year, we did about 600 acres on post-emergent on a cornfield. And going back to the customers where we did that and asked what their responses were, we have a hard time getting a response from guys, because if it's a good response, they don't want to admit too much, because then they're afraid that you're going to charge them too much the next time. So it is a real serious problem to get an accurate response. The one response that did come out of it, they said it's a great backup plan. Like the year we did that, you had a choice. You could either plant your corn or spread your manure in between rains, but you didn't have enough time to do both. So the emphasis was put on get the seed in the ground and we'll put the manure on later. And they had fantastic yields, but they wouldn't tell me that. I had to kind of go about a roundabout way to get that information. And I don't know why you wouldn't share that, because it's going to benefit them in the long run to share that. And some of the remarks we got, no matter what you do, anybody can pick your job apart. And I think the old story about the glass being half full or half empty, what we find ourselves in is not half full or half empty. It's 7/8 full or 1/8 empty. What are you going to focus on? Are you going to focus on the benefit of that 7/8, or are you going to focus on the negativity of that 1/8 of a cup? Like that's, and we're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, trying to keep everybody happy that way. Like we did leave marks in the field when we did the post application, but the results that they got with yield far outweighed the minimal amount of damage. Like we just did minimal amount of damage. It wasn't a lot.
Yeah.
The other
Any
question
other contractors? Oh, go ahead, Larry.
The other question I have for Bert, I came up with that idea of a front mounted swing pipe. Like turning around the end of the field with a drag hose has been an issue with the drag hose since the drag hose was ever invented. And what we found, what size of drag hose are you pulling, Bert, and how long a tail are you pulling behind you?
Yeah, that's what we're working with right now. We're 300 meters on 6-inch or 400 on 5-inch.
Oh man, I get screwed up in metrics. Sorry, but what we've done is we've put a second tractor in the field, and what that tractor does is move hose around the field while we're spreading. So we've reduced our diagonal with a 1,320-foot drag hose. Doesn't matter what size it is. You can, in an ideal field, you can cover 50 acres. Well, we've gone from 1,320 feet of drag hose to 3,000 feet of drag hose, and we can't pull that much around the field. But using a second tractor, we can utilize that hose and move it while we're spreading. So now, before we used to cover 50 acres in a setup in half a day and then spend half a day moving hoses. So what we do now with drag hose we've got, we can keep spreading. We don't have to pump. The faster you pump, the more of an issue of turning around at the end of the field creates on the headland. So if you slow your pumping speed down a bit, but we can go into a job and we can pump 12 hours straight without stopping, or longer if we feel like it, depending upon the size of the field. And we keep the tail on our drag tractor to a minimum so that we can turn around at the end of the field. We're not doing 3-point turns, and we've reduced the over application on the headlands. 100-acre field, we can do it in one shot. So we don't have that imaginary fence line in the middle of the field where you're turning around both ways, creating a heavy strip. So talk about precision spreading, your application is way more uniform now. Like you can put 100,000 gallons on 25 acres of field. That doesn't mean you've applied 4,000 gallons to the acre. It means, so what we're trying to do is to get that 4,000 gallons to the acre on the entire field. So you're getting me excited, Mel. I can't stop.
I know, I can hear you're no, it is. I almost wanted to pull up some pictures of Larry's setup so that you could see it, but you'll have to watch. You talked about it at the Manure Expo online, right? We talked about it. Go to OPACA's website and you'll see some videos of Larry talking about the setup. I was going to ask. There's a few. Oh, go ahead.
I won't mention any names, Mel, but we had a comment from a brother of a guy that leads OPACA. And his comment was, when we're done in the field, we go and pick up our hose in the field and leave marks in the field. And that was the case where he was dwelling on the 1/8 part of the job, not the 7/8 part of the job. So no matter what we do, we always have a critic dealing with the negative.
There's always critics, yeah.
You might know that guy.
Probably do. But and I was looking at the people who's still on the call, because there's still a few contractors. But Patrick, I saw she wrote in, so he's applied on V4 corn twice, once with a tank, once with a hose, both top spread, and those fields were top yielding farms that year. And Patrick's down in Niagara, so that's some heavy clay. Or are you not on the clay? If you want to add some more context there, Patrick.
He's on clay.
I'm going to ask Bert about that if he's ever done that, because I know Dr. Martin Van Ray, he does it up to V3, V4, and I've never done it. I'm not that brave, and I'm just thinking with the strip till and the corn sitting up in the berm, your hose is going to pull more corn out than if it was just like a flat field. But I know there are guys doing it. When you're at Van Ray's, you can talk to them about it. I know they do it, but
yeah, Jim's going to miss the tour on Wednesday. Yeah, no, we'll be going there on Wednesday, so we'll have lots of questions to ask them. I think here, I wanted to chat more about, was there anything more on application, I guess, Chris?
No, I can't think of anything.
Mm-hmm.
What about 8,000 an acre?
What was that, Bert?
We get the call quite often to put on all 8,000 or 9,000, right? But I know we're not supposed to do that. But it doesn't gain anything, does it? Like it's just a throwaway after 5, or?
Oh, that's a great question. Rates. Well, answer.
I guess I missed the question.
Okay, the question is, some farmers may want to apply really high rates, like just they think their soil needs it, and then is there any benefit to going above like at the normal threshold in terms of yields?
Nothing there to tie that nitrogen up. I mean, where's it going? I guess that's the question. It's probably going in the water table.
We did a study one year where we did some nitrogen rates, and I'm not going to tell you the number because it was high, but we did the yields in the fall, and this was where too high a rate of manure was applied, and it was in test strips, but the strip that had the additional manure applied had a 40 bushel reduction in yield just because there was so much nitrogen there. So at some point it has a toxic effect. You would have to put a lot on to get that, but the 8,000 gallons in itself is not bad. It really depends on what is the nutrient analysis of that manure. There's lots of times where dairy manure, if you're applying it to meet the about 2/3, 3/4 of the nitrogen needs and not overdoing the phosphorus, where 8,000 gallons, maybe not all at one time, but 8,000 gallons is the best rate. Finisher manure like Jim's, you would want to put that rate on. It would just be lost to the environment.
Mm-hmm.
Some evidence too that if you're pushing rates above where you need, you might be setting yourself up for higher dawn levels in your corn.
Yeah, it really depends on the Chris, you're 100% right. It depends on the nutrient content, depends on the species. You know, swine, you're playing with a pretty dangerous weapon with all the high nitrogen content. Dairy, yeah, 8,000, you know, it's probably not wildly out of line on high yielding, real fertile level dirt.
The ones I have a problem with is when and this isn't, they can't do this anymore. It's not part of the regulations, but where biosolids used to be applied once in 5 years, and they would apply it at 18 to 20,000 gallons per acre. That was like 3/4 of an inch in one application. And if the soils were wet at all and it had to be injected, just think of the smearing you're doing when you're adding that volume of water into a wet soil. So it, yeah, there's
that aspect
at
too.
the right rate is good.
Yeah. I wanted to talk.
One
Oh,
question.
go ahead.
Application. I don't know if anyone commented if they've seen the European style grassland injectors. I've been trying to get a hold of one in Canada, and it doesn't seem to be anything around like that. I've only seen them in Europe.
Talk to Husky. Walter's working with some guys in Europe. Vogelzang and Bauer, I think, are bringing them into Ontario. There's a bunch of custom applicators that have tried to invent their own, or are working on their own version of it. So they are coming here. And
Right,
the benefit is wider width, less horsepower requirements because you're not injecting it, less compaction because you've got a boom that's 60 or more feet wide. And the best part, that uniform application, so you got a lower rate every 10 inches as opposed to a higher rate every 2.5 feet.
Right. No, that's kind of the next step for our system going into the actively grown cover crop. We want to rather spread on top, inject it, but we don't want to disturb the soil while we're doing it. So
that's awesome.
And I've had a hard time tracking one down, so
we'll get you in touch. Yeah. I want to talk briefly. I didn't want to forget this slide, Bert, because Bert and most custom operators do put on those CTIS, like the deflation inflation systems on their tires, and it's amazing what it can do for compaction. Bert, do you want to talk a little bit about your system and your setup? What do you use, and do your customers like it? Does it really improve?
Yeah, well, that's always a hard one to sell to the customers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, do you show them this? This was taken at Innovative Farmers put on the compaction action. This is the exact same tanker at 50 PSI, measured at 3 different parts of the soil, the compaction potential at 3 different parts of the soil. And then just taking it down to 20 PSI and how it protects the soil. Anyways, what are your thoughts, Bert?
Well, that's the thing we should probably be doing is teach our customers more about it and what the difference is when you do and when you don't use it, right? So yeah, it's we use the system from ThreatRight. That's supplied by Alstire. We have it on our tanker and on we're going to be putting it on a drag hose tractor too this coming season. So that's the plan, anyways. And it's for the custom operator side of things is beneficial because you get your fuel benefits out of it because you can pump them up real high on the road and low in the field.
Yeah.
So you use less fuel going down to the fields, and your tire life is going to be longer. And nowadays, to equip one tanker with tires, if it's a triaxle, you're looking at $60,000 for one tanker. So that's important to keep that another couple of years longer if you can. So yeah, that's the big benefit that long-term benefit that we're going to see from it. And even our own fields, right? If you have it or not, you can see the benefit there with your own yields and your own crop. But our business is basically, I think, 95% custom. So we have just a small portion of our own cash cropping.
Okay.
I guess this point is you got to teach your customers a little better than what we do now.
Yeah, there's definitely, it's a process.
It was interesting. It was interesting what Adrian said last week at the Moorfield, where he said that it was also saving him money in tire wear and in. Do you notice that, Bert?
Yeah, that's where you find the difference. Your tires last longer, and also your fuel. You're just going up the hill or a long stretch. You can do, timing is better and your fuel usage is lower because it rolls easier when the tire is harder. But if that hard, it's not good in the field.
Yeah.
But yeah, Bert's right. Trying to get a farmer to pay more for the fact that you are causing less compaction. Yeah, I know my local guys say, yeah, good luck.
Mm.
The savings
just-
have to come. The savings
Yeah.
can make the system works, because just what Bert talks about, but from the cheap
From a
farmer
customer's
point of view,
perspective.
they don't want to pay anymore. They'll go down the road to the competitor that's half a cent cheaper. You know, is what the potential is always.
Yeah. So we've only got a few minutes left. If you can believe it, we've been chatting for almost 2 whole hours, and the time flies by. Margaret May, in case you were here for KSE credits, she's put the link in the chat. And I also have an evaluation that I need you to complete. But I'll pop this, I'll pop my evaluation in. This is for OMARFA. They need to know that we did a decent job, hopefully. So that's what I just put in the chat. But I also want to share the next little video and then finalize our conversation.
Manure adds nutrients and organic matter to soil and helps support crop yields. But you can have too much of a good thing. Too much manure over time can lead to high phosphorus test levels, which are of no use to the plant and are prone to nutrient runoff, which can cause algal blooms in waterways downstream. Sometimes the best plan is to move manure off the farm altogether to a field in need. Manure is by nature bulky, and there are limits to the distances it can be economically hauled. Long-distance dragline systems and road trailers can lengthen those distances for liquid and solid manure. The easiest solution is to find a neighbor that could buy or trade for it. Poultry manure is commonly trucked farther, with its high dry matter and nutrient contents. Some producers are exploring compaction and wrapping for long-haul transport, and there are systems to dry, pelletize, and bag manure on farm for marketing. For liquid manure, there may be ways to reduce the price of hauling through farm-to-farm pipelines or concentration to lower transport volumes and get it further afield. Solid liquid separation can be easily done on farm with screw presses to separate the two, but the problem remains because both have nutrients in them. The solids will have slow-release nitrogen and potassium, and the liquids will have the fast-release nitrogen and phosphorus. If we are going to go to the trouble of separating the two, we need to improve the overall economics of utilizing the separate components. Manure is valuable stuff, but if your soil tests are too high, then you are not getting the full potential value. It wouldn't hurt to have a conversation with a neighbor who does not have livestock. If all your neighbors all seem to have too much manure, then you might look at what sort of processing or collaboration opportunities might be practical. Manure is a great resource, but even here you can have too much of a good thing, and if your soil levels are getting too high, you should explore options to move it off farm.
So that kind of leads us into the last bit of our conversation is, okay, so if you're going to sell manure, what do you charge? And what would people pay for it? And I'm curious, we did already kind of start the conversation earlier on, even just making those connections, because there's lots of guys that want to buy manure. How long can you truck it? How much does it cost? Thoughts, anyone? Anyone at all? Chris, what did you pay for manure? Be honest.
Well, I traded straw, but
Okay.
I also looked at what was the value of the available nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium based on when it was applied and the type of manure it was. And was because I'm getting the micronutrients and the organic matter, which is something that I don't have. So I was willing to pay that in exchange for the straw. The hardest part was the transport cost because it's coming from a bit away. And that's where stuff like compost sometimes, if you can get it, is a nice deal, or anaerobic digestate from some of the industrial plants like BioN or Stormfisher can be a nice option because you're just paying the transport costs.
Yep. Anyone else? What's a good formula?
We can buy Manure.
Oh,
Go ahead,
sorry.
Bert.
Okay, Bert, then Jim.
What's that? Sorry? Oh.
Bert
I
and then
could
Jim.
buy solid manure last fall for $8 a ton. Then I had to pick it up. That was cattle manure.
Okay.
And a guy in our area delivers it mostly around 12 to 14. Delivered to the field. And
Okay.
that's mixture between dairy and poultry.
Wow, I'm gonna ask you who that was. I want to buy some manure.
Yeah.
Awesome. Jim.
Yeah, we've bought cattle manure before. Well, I guess traded for straw, so we were getting probably a good 10, probably closer to 12 ton an acre of cattle manure. We use their equipment to spread our labor for an acre straw.
Oh, interesting. What else have we heard? We heard someone just pays the value of the phosphorus in the manure. Some say half the value of the P and the K. What else did we hear, Chris?
Yeah, the value really changes depending on how land base, how much land base you've got or don't have, and how many other livestock neighbors are in the neighborhood.
Yes.
Because if you're in a livestock dense area, it's harder to get rid of that manure than if you're surrounded by crop farmers.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, in that video, it just said, this is something they can do with chicken manure, is you can actually compact it and bale it in the same way you make like silage bales, and you can do long haul transport of chicken manure. I've not seen that yet in Ontario, and on my side of Ontario. Has anyone else seen that?
No,
well, not the baling.
in Europe, I seen them. They bag manure.
Bag them.
Get a bagger and lay it on the headlands. And add some additives to it, and then
They do that here with biosolid pellets that have to be stored over the winter.
Okay.
They would bag it. What does that do? Does it anaerobically compost somehow?
No, it prevents it from starting on fire.
Yeah.
Besides that. That was always fun when manure starts on fire. Yeah, any other thoughts or from anyone listening, have they found the perfect formula for manure? Or
well, Mel, you never talked about your European toilets, animal toilets.
Oh no, I don't want to talk about the cow toilet, but I guess if people have lasted this long, then they should get to hear about the cow toilet. I've talked to Bruce Kelly at length about it. Bruce says, okay, talk about the cow toilet. It was in the video. You only briefly saw it. And the idea is, yeah, if urine never hits the feces, if number one, or as Bruce says, if number one and number two don't mix, then you don't even have the off-gassing in the first place. So what they're trying to train cows to do is they go for a little nibble, and then they basically pop a urinal behind them, and they try to make them pee into the urinal, and then they totally separate it, and they put that in a tote where they can apply it separately as just urine on the field. But Europe is doing some incredible innovation with manure, and I think it's just a matter of time before it comes here. But what's really driving it in the Netherlands, especially, is the regulation that they have there. And so, yeah, look into the Lely sphere. The Jaws has the nitrogen cracker. They're pulling the gas off out of the barn and then running it through a filter and making liquid nitrogen out of it. So it's pretty cool. Bruce, your
Mel,
video's on. Any thoughts?
Well, I can't let this one go, Mel, because how often do you get to talk about a flying bedpan? But essentially, it's a swinging bedpan behind a dairy cow and captures the urine straight off the back of the cow before it ever touches the ground. And in the videos they sent us, it worked just as described. This flying bedpan swung in behind the cow and captured the urine, and then they make nitrogen fertilizer right out of urine.
Yeah. No, it's incredible. And I saw the barn in real life, and it really does work. But that's Hanskamp, the company, and they've also designed like basically like kitty litter, it looks like a compost pack barn, except it never composts because they go in with a poop and scoop twice a day. And so it captures everything and pulls it out, and then it keeps it super clean. So that I forget where they're doing that, but if you're interested, get in touch. I'll put my info in here in case you don't have it, info@opaca.net. But yeah, we've got to wrap up this conversation. So I want to say, oh, Chris, you put in, what was that? Oh, you meant to say Husky has been working with Vogelsang and Bomec. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I put that in earlier, but only to Jim, so sorry.
Gotcha, okay. Okay, well then there's probably more conversation to be had. We'd love to see, if you're from Ontario, we'd love to see you in Dashwood on Wednesday, or just come on a big trip out east with a bunch of us, because we're gonna go to Kemptville. And I will make sure that all of our speakers get this amazing prize. I don't know if you can see it. An amazing gift for speaking on the shit show. There, I said it. Okay. Thank you, and I'll turn it back to Andrew.
Very good. Thanks, Mel. And thank you to our panel today. Bert, Jim, Russ, Christine, Mel, and Bruce Kelly jumping in as well. Thank you, everyone. Great conversation. You're not finished, but you're stopping. And more to come on that. So reminder to everybody, these are recorded. You can watch them. And next week, we will deal with the topic managing weed seeds. So we hope to see you here same time next week. And take care. Have a great week. Cheers.